Hi, I'm Daniel Antoine, the acting keeper of the Department of Egypt and Sudan at the British Museum and the curator of bioarchaeology.
And I'm Marie van den Bosch, curator in the Department of Egypt and Sudan. Welcome to our corner.
So actually we know relatively little about mummification. Textbooks tend to focus on the same case studies, and some of the work we're trying to do here is looking at how the process of mummification has evolved over time and how it may varied between regions and by periods. We're also trying to determine how old they were when they died, but also their state of health at death. At the British Museum, we've been using a very powerful new CT scan, and that allows us to capture both the thinner elements, the delicate skin and textiles, equally as well as the more dense elements such as the skeleton. If you compare it to the data we captured 10 years ago, really we're getting unprecedented details that was never captured before.
So this is the mummy of a small child. He was around 4 years old when he died. He lived during the 1st century AD and was buried in a cemetery at Awara in this necropolis, which is south of Cairo. And we know that he was found with other mummified individuals, including a boy, a girl, and 2 women. We decided to re-examine the remains of that child and try to understand a bit more how he lived and how he died. The first clue we had about him was actually what we can see when we look at this mummy. There's this wonderful portrait showing a young boy with long hair at the back and a small fringe at the front. And if you really look at this beautiful portrait, we really already have an insight about who was that child. One of the details I particularly like on this Laura shroud is a detail at the side where you actually can see the child himself, and is all gilded, showing that he became a divine himself and is led by different gods in front of the god Osiris. And look in particular at the side lock that he has at the side of his head, and it shows that he's a child and is depicted as a child in the afterlife. But what we actually can't see is the side of that shroud, because there is a layer of a sort of brown substance completely covering the sides. But using the CT scan, we actually managed to reveal all the decoration which is hidden on the sides. And you can see a quite complex decoration showing the goddess Isis on one side and Nephthys on the other one. And they are spreading their wings around the face of the child as a sort of protective measure. They are there to protect him and to protect his head and his face for eternity. So one of the things that we discovered when looking at the CT data is this child actually had 4 amulets that were placed on his body. They were placed directly on his skin, just underneath the layers of wrappings, and they were made in wax, and I actually think that they were probably gilded.
What the CT scan showed us, and his teeth are still growing inside his jaw, which allows us to give a relatively precise age of death, most probably between 3 and 5 years. But also the mummification is interesting because it doesn't really differ too much from that of adults. The brain was removed via the nose, but unlike many mummies, some resin was poured inside that cavity after the brain was removed, and some of it has seeped down the spinal column. The organs are likely to have been removed, but the chest and the abdomen are very compressed, and it's unclear from the scan whether these were fully removed or not. So that the mummification of the child follows a lot of the tradition which had developed over time and had occurred and been used for previous mummies. So over the last decade, we've been able to CT scan dozens of mummies. And what's becoming clear is that between the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom, and later periods, there is a process of evolution where the embalmers are learning different methods and techniques. The methods used in the Old Kingdom are very experimental, and we can see that they improve over time, certainly leading up to the pinnacle of mummification just before this period, the Roman period, where they've really mastered the skill of preserving the body, but also preserving the likeness of a person.
So what we also realized that the variation in terms of mummification changes throughout time, but also depends on the different places where the person would have been mummified. And even within this same area, you can see variations. This young child had his brain removed, for example, while the other boy didn't. And when you start looking at all this kind of variation, you can see the multitude of techniques that were used by embalmers.
So the insights gained are not representative of the whole ancient Egyptian populations. But for example, we're discovering that some of the diseases they suffered from, terrible dental diseases with tooth decay, dental abscesses, gum disease. But also, we're able to image the arteries that have been left behind by the embalmers. And inside these arteries, we can see hardened plaque, which is basically hardened cholesterol. And this is clearly visible, affecting the arteries in the neck, around the heart, in the legs and arms. And this is basically a disease that we think is a very modern disease, arteriosclerosis, which leads to strokes and heart attack. And the more we CT scan mummified individuals, the greater the data set, the more we realize that that condition affected many ancient Egyptians. And what we think of as a modern disease actually goes back far in time. And why were these individuals affected by cardiovascular disease? Maybe because they were elite. They had access to a diet rich in animal fat and rich food. And other insights in terms of their state of health we're finding is that some of them suffer from cancer, again, a disease that we think is a modern condition. So really these are transforming understanding of how far these diseases go back in time and providing unique insights and a deep time perspective on diseases which we think are very modern but appear to be affected humans, including humans from the Nile Valley for thousands of years.
Before the Roman period, there are few mummies of children. During the Roman period, we have far more of mummification of children, and that really allows us to get a better understanding of this part of the population that we had little access before. And we don't know if it's a change in terms of beliefs, in terms of perception of the afterlife, or if it's actually because there are much more individuals who had access to mummification at that time.
So maybe it's an accident of archaeology where greater numbers of sites from the Roman period have been excavated, which means that we've found a greater number of Roman children. Before research that we're doing and that other institutions around the world are doing, we had a very limited database. Very few individuals had been studied, and very few had been X-rayed or CT scanned. And now we're really starting to appreciate how complex embalming was in the past and how it varied by time and by region and by period. And of course, it's an opportunity for us to share our findings with colleagues around the world, including our colleagues in Egypt, who are leading the way with the study of royal mummies. And together, by pooling our research and our data, we can gain a clearer sense of what ancient Egyptian mummification meant to the ancient Egyptians.